Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you, but wish it was under better news or circumstances in general. But my name is Shaniqua McClendon. I am the Senior Political Director here at Crooked Media. And tonight we had plans to kick off our Midterm Madness program, which we would still like for you all to sign up for at votesaveamerica.com/midterms. And for those of you who are not familiar with Midterm Madness, basically how it goes is depending on what state you live in, we're asking you to sign up for one of our four regions. And so it's Team East, West, South, and Midwest. And over the next few months, we're going to send you one action you can take each week to build progressive political power in 2022, from your local school board to the battleground Senate races in your region. So if you're not signed up already, head over to votesaveamerica.com/midterms and join your region. But in light of last night's news, we're going to spend our time with you today chatting about, we're going to spend our time with you today to bring in an expert to discuss the road ahead with the SCOTUS Roe decision, the draft decision that was released or leaked last night that will be coming sometime this summer officially. And joining us for that conversation is University of Michigan law professor and Strict Scrutiny podcast host, Leah Litman. And she's going to speak with us today about what's ahead after this decision that's been leaked. So I just want to say hi, Leah, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm sure lots of people have been taking your time today. So we appreciate that. And then just before we jump into the conversation, anyone who's joining us today, feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat as we go along the conversation. And before we wrap up, we'll try to get to some of them today. We'll just jump right in. So we know that the draft opinion that came out, or I keep saying came out, that was leaked, was real. I know yesterday a lot of us were, just wondering if it was legitimate. And so we know that it's real. And I think a big question that a lot of people have is how close is the final opinion going to be to the draft that was leaked yesterday? And what does it mean for people who may be seeking abortion right now?
The shorter answer is we just simply don't know. That is the leaked opinion that we saw, is a draft opinion that Justice Alito thought could get at least 5 votes after the justices initially met to decide how they were going to decide the case in December. And it's also the opinion that he thought could get at least 5 votes when he circulated it at the end of February. But the reality is that sometimes justices change their minds after they initially cast a vote when the justices meet during their official conferences. And sometimes justices change their mind based on what's been circulated. This actually somewhat famously happened in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is the last time the Supreme Court was asked to overrule Roe versus Wade. After the opinion was actually formally released, news outlets reported that Justice Anthony Kennedy had initially voted to overrule Roe versus Wade, but then later changed his mind. So on some level, it's possible that the result in the case could change. It's possible that the reasoning in the case could change. It's also possible that the final version of the opinion reaching the same result, largely for similar reasons, will also change. We just don't know. But I think people should acknowledge that this is also a court that has basically been built in a Federalist Society test tube. These justices were selected because they thought they were going to overrule Roe versus Wade. That's what the GOP promised to do in 2016, and that's what they appear poised to do. So I don't know that we should expect, 1 to 2 justices to really change their mind and all of a sudden affirm Roe. I think the most likely scenario is there will still be an opinion at the end of June that overrules Roe, but we don't actually know until the final opinion is released. Now, until then, Roe versus Wade is still the law of the land. So for people who need abortion care now and who want abortion care now, Roe still prevents states from banning abortions before viability. But of course, the cruel reality is people don't know that they need abortion care, 6 to 8 weeks in advance, which, is the time period that we're looking at right now for the possible end of Roe.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And it's what you just said about the likeliness of justices changing their decisions. Yeah, I think people need to hear that. And, despite some senators saying they were completely shocked by this, I think we have, like you said, been seeing this coming for some time, as especially as the most recent prior 3 justices were confirmed to the Supreme Court. So my next question is kind of about if there are any alternatives that maybe elected leaders can take. Democrats right now control Congress. Joe Biden's in the White House, and so Democrats have both chambers of Congress and the White House. And so, is there any chance, legally or politically, that they can pass any type of law that preempts this decision before it's officially out?
I mean, nothing is stopping Congress from passing a federal statute that protects people's ability to obtain abortions or creates, a supply of federal doctors to offer abortion care. Nothing's stopping Congress from doing that. They could eliminate the filibuster, but, we have several Democratic senators who have pledged not to do so. So that's what's standing in the way, but they could, if they decided to eliminate the filibuster, do so tomorrow at the federal level. Now, the other thing that's standing in their way is the buzzsaw for civil rights that is the Supreme Court. And nothing would stop this currently constituted Supreme Court from invalidating or striking down legislation that a Democratic Congress enacted and a Democratic president signed protecting people's access to abortion. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that any federal solution for access to reproductive health care will have to deal with the current Supreme Court that we have.
And just a quick follow-up on that. So let's say in some miraculous turn of events, Democrats expand their majorities in the Senate and are able to maintain their majority in the House. Even then, the Supreme Court would need to change in order to, kind of go, if once a decision comes out, the Supreme Court would have to change in order for Democrats to truly have the opportunity to change the law.
Well, here's the thing. Under current law, that is the Supreme Court's cases as they currently stand, it would be more than permissible for Congress to enact a federal statute that protects access to abortion. But who's to say the Supreme Court won't change the law to strike down that statute? I mean, they're poised to overrule Roe versus Wade, a decision that is so foundational and fundamental to so many people's equal access to society, that who is to say they won't change the law and say, well, all of a sudden, we believe that fetuses are people who are protected by the Constitution, and therefore the government can't permit abortion to occur and needs to criminalize it. Or who is to say they won't say, well, actually, under the Constitution, Congress doesn't have the authority to regulate abortion, even though it is a form of medical care for which there is an interstate market. And so that's the concern.
Yeah. So knowing what we know with the decision that was leaked, the draft decision, and what will likely be the decision we see in a couple of months, is there anything that people can do right now to prepare for this new reality and try to fight back against it?
There are many different things. I think immediately there are a set of elections coming up on the heels of what's likely to be a decision overruling Roe versus Wade. And those elections are important at the federal level. They're important at the state and local level, particularly in jurisdictions where you have some laws on the books that could spring back into effect that criminalize abortions, where the elections for your local district attorneys and local prosecutors are going to be really important about whether those laws might be enforced. So I think one thing is just looking ahead to the upcoming election and figuring out how you can mobilize all of the rage that you felt at 8:38 p.m. on Monday evening when you learned that there was a draft opinion overruling Roe. Take that and apply it to what you can do for the upcoming election and elect people who will enact legislation at the federal level securing voting rights so that state politicians who enact these cruel laws that lack popular support actually face some public accountability and electoral consequences, enact politicians at the state level who will repeal the state's trigger laws, enact, state executive officials at the state level and the local level who won't enforce outdated, paternalistic, criminal abortion bans. There are so many different things that you can do. And it's going to be a long haul. The reality is it took the conservative legal movement several decades to get to the point where they had enough power at the federal level to be on the precipice of overruling Roe. And I don't think we should delude ourselves into thinking we are going to fix this in a year. But we need to commit ourselves to a fight that is going to be long, but that is worth fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that is something that we hope for everyone who participates in Vote Save America. I know that we got started after Donald Trump was elected, and a lot of our work has been focused on elections, but like building that power across the long term is what we hope you all will join us for, because Republicans had a very long-term view and they're finally kind of seeing the fruits of their labor. And it's going to take us some time. So I just had one other question, and then I'm going to go to some questions from the audience. But are there any, in states where it's just, I don't want to say impossible, but very hard to elect Democrats or progressives, are there ballot initiatives that people can support in states that, or just generally, I guess, are ballot initiatives a way that people can kind of work toward policy change in places where they might not be able to get the elected officials that will do that for them?
That's absolutely one possible avenue for change. I'm in Michigan, and right now there's a bunch of organizing being done to add a amendment, to the upcoming election that would amend the state constitution in order to protect, the right to abortion explicitly in the state constitution. So there are lots of state and local initiatives that you can get involved in that would be kind of direct initiatives to amend the law in your jurisdiction without having to go through what are oftentimes heavily gerrymandered state legislatures that may be stacked against, public opinion and voters.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to a few of our audience questions, and 3 of them touch on different subjects, but kind of are getting at the same thing. And people just want to know what your thoughts are on based on the draft that we saw, what are your thoughts on other issues that kind of might fall under the same legal thinking, like LGBTQ equality, any bans on contraception, and just what else might the courts go after?
I think those are the 2 issues that are first and on the forefront of my mind about what could happen next. The court's LGBTQ equality cases are rooted in the same constitutional guarantee that the court in Roe versus Wade recognized protect the decision to have an abortion, and the critiques that the Supreme Court in this draft opinion is making of Roe versus Wade could be applied against the decisions protecting, the right to marriage equality or the right to same-sex sexual relationships. In this draft opinion, Justice Alito says, well, the right to abortion isn't explicitly mentioned in the Constitution's text. Well, neither is the right to interracial marriage, neither is the right to same-sex marriage, neither is the right to contraception. Justice Alito says, well, look, in the 1800s and 1900s, there weren't state constitutional provisions protecting the right to abortion. Newsflash, there also weren't provisions protecting the right to contraception or the right to interracial marriage either. And Justice Alito specifically criticizes the reasoning in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the idea that rights should be defined at high levels of generality. That was also the kind of reasoning that the court used in Obergefell versus Hodges, the decision recognizing marriage equality, and Lawrence versus Texas, the case invalidating a prohibition on same-sex sexual relationships.
Thank you. Have another question here. What legislation should we push for in our states to protect abortion rights for state residents and non-residents? Are there any states we should ask our own states to model?
2 ideas come to mind. One is a law like the one that Connecticut has considered, which would immunize Connecticut residents from liability in the event that they assisted out-of-state residents in obtaining abortion care in Connecticut. Missouri has considered, and I think may even have almost been on the verge of enacting a law that would actually impose penalties on Missouri residents who leave the state to obtain abortions. And there's a real risk that states are going to try to impose, a abortion ban outside of their borders. So one thing that states can do is attempt to immunize residents for potential liability in other states in the event that they assist people in obtaining abortion care. Another thing is there are some states that still have trigger laws on the books. There are other states that have criminal abortion bans on the books, but they're just not enforced now and can't be enforced because courts have said they violate the federal constitution. I think repealing all of those laws is a good idea. And that's just where I'd start.
Yeah, we have another question that I've actually been wondering about too. How does the text of the draft ruling affect the court's relationship with precedent and the legitimacy of the court?
So the court says, well, we are considering the doctrine of stare decisis, which is the legal rule about when the court is supposed to overrule and not overrule precedents. But I think it's safe to say its discussion of that is quite fleeting and dismissive. In one remarkable opinion, or one remarkable sentence in the opinion, the court says, actually, this court has overruled precedent many times. Here are a few examples, and then includes a footnote that spans 3 pages, as if to say, overruling cases, that's no big deal. And then the court goes on to criticize the ruling in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which declined to overrule Roe, and declined to overrule Roe in part by considering the views of the public. And the fact that people were pushing the courts to overrule Roe and that the court would be perceived as political for doing so. And the court says, those aren't the kinds of considerations that we should take into account. It's just our job to impose what we think the law is. And I think the court in this draft opinion has made very clear, it doesn't really care what the broader public thinks. It views itself as largely unconstrained by the public. They're insulated from political pressure, and Democrats have shown no kind of political will to go after the Supreme Court either. And so they just think like, we can kind of do what we want.
Yeah. Have one more question, and then I will let you go. And honestly, this sounds like maybe another lawyer asked this question, but I will ask it, not knowing entirely what it means. Do you think the privileges and immunities clause can be resurrected if substantive due process dies?
So the Privileges and Immunities Clause is another clause in the 14th Amendment that protects the privileges and immunities of U.S. citizenship. Roe versus Wade and other cases had held states can't criminalize abortion or contraception because those things are liberties protected by the Due Process Clause. Sure, the Privileges and Immunities Clause can be resurrected, but there's zero chance that this court would say the right to access abortion is a privilege and immunity of United States citizenship that is protected by the Constitution. The opinion makes clear that, again, the text of the Constitution doesn't explicitly mention abortion, that the history shows no constitutional protection for abortion, and that the court believes that abortion ends, a potential life and potentially a human life, and thus differentiates it from any other possible rights. Now, I don't think that's true, but all of those three things combined make it safe to say that no matter what point or what piece of the Constitution you might point to say, well, this protects implicitly the right to abortion, this court is going to say, no way.
Well, thank you for all of that. I know this was very insightful, and okay, sorry, we have one more, and then
okay.
Cut it off. It just came in. So it looks like a few people have asked about fetal personhood and what are the next steps in the contraception? Sorry. A couple of questions about fetal personhood. Oh, for example, what's the conservative movement's next step? Thank you, Julia.
So fetal personhood is the idea that fetuses are people under the Constitution who are entitled to the protections of life, liberty, and property, and entitled to equal protection of the laws. Based on that idea, some conservative legal theorists and lawyers have argued that the Constitution of its own force prohibits abortion, bans abortion, requires governments to prohibit abortion. So that's the theory that they're kind of pushing at or considering going with next, namely that it's not enough to say states get to decide whether to ban abortions. The next step would be, no, the Constitution bans abortion and requires the states to criminalize abortion. So that's what fetal personhood refers to. There are, frankly, some passages of this opinion that gesture toward that idea. In a footnote, the court cites an amicus brief by 2 scholars who have argued that the Constitution protects fetuses as people and therefore requires governments to criminalize abortion. And throughout the opinion says, well, look, a lot of states actually view fetuses as human beings. And, Roe and Casey acknowledge that abortion involves potential life. And all of those things are gesturing toward the theory of fetal personhood, which Justice Alito, the author of this draft opinion, actually brought up at oral argument, saying, look, fetuses are entitled to life, and that interest applies throughout a pregnancy. So, I think many people were shocked at the possibility that the court was going to overrule Roe. And this next step, fetal personhood, sounds truly outlandish. But I think it would be dangerous to think, well, this opinion is just going to end what this court is going to do on issues of reproductive justice and fundamental rights.
Well, thank you. This has been really, really informative. It's not like all the best news, but I think it's really important that we understand, what we found out last night, what's coming ahead, and quite frankly, what we're facing, and why it's so important for us to continue to be involved. And I know there was one more question about what will it take for Democrats to eliminate the filibuster? And essentially, we need enough Democrats to eliminate the filibuster. Right now, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have made clear that they are not going to do that. So we at least need to expand our majority by 2 more Democratic senators. And that is part of why we launched Midterm Madness. We want folks to get involved at every level of government, but one level of government is the Senate. A lot of you all helped with Adopt a State in 2020, and that extended into the runoffs in Georgia that helped give Democrats a 1-vote majority with the help of Vice President Kamala Harris. But in order to eliminate the filibuster, attempt to codify Roe, but also just thinking about voting rights and all the things that we haven't been able to see passed over the first year and a half of Joe Biden's presidency will require us expanding our majorities in the Senate. So we are asking all of you to do 2 things. First is to head over to votesaveamerica.com/Roe, and there you'll find our bans action plan, where you can find ways to have an immediate impact on the information that we just found out yesterday, and how you can fight back. And so making sure that we can provide access to people who need to access abortions, volunteering, providing donations to abortion funds, just so people can continue to access those services. And then as we continue out, we'll continue adding more information. And there's also today's episode, I think, of Strict Scrutiny linked there as well. So you can just learn more about everything. And then next week, we hope that you will join us for the 2nd installment of our game plan series, where we'll speak to some activists and lawmakers about building power at the state and local level to protect access to abortions. And then finally, I know this is, we're asking you to do 3 things, but finally is to just sign up for our Midterm Madness program. And so as I mentioned at the start of this conversation, if you go to votesaveamerica.com/midterms, you'll see there's 4 regions you can sign up for. And we're asking everyone to join their region to make sure that we can elect progressives from the school board all the way up to the Senate to not only protect access abortion, but a lot of the things that are under threat right now and have been under threat for some time. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Leah, for joining us. And we hope to see you all next week.
Take care.